Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 3 of Newscap. As always, trusty Corona on hand. I was going to wear my Corona shirt, but I decided maybe not this episode. So we are going to be talking a lot about Russia and China again this week. They made some big moves. We talked briefly about the possibility of what happened this week a few weeks ago. So we're going to jump right into it. Our first news story comes from NBC, and it's written by Corky Simasko. It's titled U.S. Kills ISIS Leader, but another is already waiting in the wings. This was written on February 3rd. On February 2nd, U.S. Special Forces got active again, and this time they were targeting Abu Ibrahim al-Hasimi al-Kuwarshi at a Syrian hideout. So he is the current ISIS leader. This happened in Idlib, Syria. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said U.S. forces were able to evacuate 10 people from the house, including 8 children, before the raid commenced. The BBC News reported that from local sources said that the U.S. Special Forces faced stiff resistance on the ground, coming under fire from anti-aircraft guns mounted on vehicles. The building housed 3 families. Kuwarshi's family lived on the second floor, another family lived on the first floor, and a third family lived on the third floor. So U.S. intel decided that instead of just blowing up the building and risking all those innocent civilians, that they decided to send the special forces in, and they took care of that. So those killed in the raid included an ISIS deputy or lieutenant, his wife, 2 individuals a part of a group deemed hostile as they approached the area during the gunfight. 2 of those individuals were killed. And as the raid continued, Kuwarshi detonated an explosive device on the 3rd floor of the house, killing himself, his wife, and 2 children. Now, some reports have said that there was a 3rd child involved, that he killed a 3rd child of his, but I have not been able to confirm if it was 2 or 3. The U.S. faced no casualties, but had a chopper malfunction, which resulted in it being left and ultimately destroyed. So super interesting, right? I mean, this dude, instead of going out fighting, decides to blow himself up. You know, I mean, where's the honor in that? Where's the courage in that? These people hate the West, right? They're radical. They're willing to do anything. And then when it comes down to it, the last triumph that they could possibly have, they blow themselves up. That's very cowardice, in my opinion. That man's a coward. It seems that ISIS is putting these people in leadership positions, and they blow themselves up at the end. I mean, shit. They didn't even take any U.S. people with them. Coward. Anyways, the previous ISIS leader was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. You guys remember? He was actually in charge of ISIS during Trump's administration. He was also killed in the northwest part of Syria in October of 2019. Al-Baghdadi did the same cowardice move and actually blew himself up. 3 of his children. So what is it with these people that are just blowing themselves up? So Trump claimed that capturing the world's #1 terrorist leader had been a top national security priority of his administration, and he ended up taking him out in October of 2019. According to former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and former special envoy of Syria, James Jeffrey, the shelf life of an ISIS leader is about 3.5 years, and special forces has been going absolutely ham in Syria and taking out leaders left and right. U.S. Special Forces, man, keep kicking ass, taking names. I mean, we are out here taking people out, and that's huge because it limits the ability of ISIS to organize, to group. Special Forces executed, President Biden pulled the trigger, and now the world is one less. Happy times. So what is the significance of this death of ISIS's leader? ISIS is going to have a hard time regrouping. In the next week or 2, I imagine there'll be a new leader. And I don't see ISIS coming out and announcing the new leader because obviously that puts a price tag on that person's head. So Trump, before Trump was out of presidency, he pretty much annihilated ISIS. ISIS was not a factor anymore. They had to regroup. They had to retreat. They had to go into hiding. And apparently Abu Ibrahim felt that he was safe hiding out and just sending couriers all over the countryside running ISIS, but the United States found him. Killing the leader of ISIS provides the United States a psychological advantage, makes them constantly stay in fear. Obviously, the shelf life of an ISIS leader is very short, so every time that they think they're safe, they have to worry about getting blown up or having special forces bust down their doors in the middle of the night. And imagine not feeling safe in the confines of your own home. I mean, that would be a really shitty feeling, in my opinion. This also makes the ISIS organization a lot less appealing for new recruits. You know, they no longer have the power and influence that they had at the height of their reign when they were in Iraq and Syria, and just absolutely going crazy, blowing things up, stealing weapons, making promotion videos, had an online social media presence. They're no longer like that. So new recruits are, I would imagine, feeling turned off by ISIS's new stark reality of having to hide and maintain their ideology online. So the psychological advantage of the United States is similar to how IEDs took a significant toll on United States troops during Afghanistan and Iraq. The constant fear of having to watch your step, thinking that you might step on a landmine every single step. It takes a toll emotionally, physically, and ultimately, without even having to do anything, you're creating a panic and a worry. You're creating a tense situation, which anytime you're making the enemy think, what may happen, this can happen, blah, 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 whatever. It's a psychological advantage. So for those of you that had some comments about my background, I'm working with what I got. So I try to, put up a flag that I've had hanging, that I've had in storage for a little while. As you can probably see, it's a little bit wrinkled. And, I've been looking to get some new lights, for the backdrop and everything. But damn, YouTube lights are expensive. So in the meanwhile, I just got to work with what I got. My wife's got a nice little ring light right here that I can use. Thank you, babe. Appreciate it. But it's a work in progress. This is not the final setup, and I'm working to something larger. But for now, they say work with what you got. This is what I got. It's also my brother-in-law's birthday today. Congratulations, brother, for making it on another year. I love you. I'm very thankful that you're a part of this family, and I hope you have a killer day, man. So that's going to move us into our second article of the week, and this is going to deal with Russia and China. So we're back on the global politics side of things. This article is by Reuters. China and Russia partner up against the West at the Olympic summit. It was written on February 4th. China and Russia declared a no-limits partnership, backing each other's provisions in regards to the Ukraine and Taiwan with a promise to collaborate. So we talked a few weeks ago about how this could be a potential go-to option for Russia and China because they both have qualms with the United States. Obviously, Russia with NATO, and then China with Taiwan. And so actually, we find ourselves in a very similar situation. Ukraine's right on the border of Russia. Taiwan is right off the coast of mainland China. The two leaders determined that the relationship was superior to any Cold War alliance and that they would work together on space, climate change, artificial intelligence, and control of the internet. So these authoritarian governments, obviously China's communist government, they want to control the internet. And as of right now, China's done a really good of firewalling all of the Western internet and providing a completely independent internet to their citizens, like Facebook, Google, all those companies, they're not the ones that are being used in China. So once you have control of the information, you can control the narrative. And now that's a really important topic for another time. Beijing now supports Russia's demand that Ukraine should not be admitted into NATO. And likewise, Moscow now opposes any form of independence for Taiwan, standing behind China's position that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. So I said a couple weeks ago that China is going to want Taiwan back to settle the civil conflict, right? If you follow history as a precedent, civil wars, they don't stay divided. At the end of the Civil War, both sides come back together and they try to rebuild on something new. Maybe not every time. Maybe the United States just has a unique situation when that happened. But typically we see the reunification of a civil conflict. That gets a little muddy if you incorporate genocidal situations when it's ethnic cleansing, because then obviously religion and ideologies are ultimately at the root cause of that civil conflict, and those are harder to overcome in my opinion. So both countries voiced opposition to the September 2021 Australia, United Kingdom, and United States alliance, saying it increased the danger of the arms race in the region. So now this is something that I didn't really know about before. It kind of went over my head. This alliance is called, it's acronym AUKUS, so AUKUS. Yeah, let's go with AUKUS. I'm going to go into a brief detail about that so you guys know what I'm talking about from there. Since 2005, NATO and Australia have been engaged in dialogue and cooperation. Australia supported NATO-led defense capacity building efforts in Afghanistan via the Afghan National Army Trust Fund and participated in NATO Mission Iraq. NATO Mission Iraq is a non-combat mission that aims to strengthen Iraqi security institutions and forces so that they can prevent the return of ISIS, fight terrorism, and stabilize their country. This was created in 2018 following a request from the Iraqi government. So the Iraqi government wanted some more stability in their nation, and they wanted help from NATO and other allies in the world. So this is straight from the White House website. NATO-Australia priorities have historically centered on upholding the international rules-based order, promoting mutual understanding of global security issues, enhancing interoperability, and engaging on issues of common interest. Australia and NATO work together to strengthen maritime security. In the past, the Australian Navy has cooperated with NATO to fight piracy off the coast of Somalia, as part of Operation Ocean Shield. So NATO partners need to be interoperable. So what does interoperable mean? It's the ability to operate together with NATO forces according to NATO standards, procedures, rules, and also using similar equipment. So in 2014, at the Wales Summit, NATO launched the Partnership Interoperability Initiative, PII, to maintain and deepen the interoperability that has been developed with partners during NATO-led missions over the last decades. So technically, Australia is not a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but they have time and time again showed support and have fought side by side with NATO and NATO allies. So basically, as a result of PII, NATO granted enhanced opportunities for deeper cooperation with 6 partners. Now, this is interesting. Australia, Finland, Georgia, Jordan, Sweden, and Ukraine. So obviously, Ukraine and Georgia are near Russia's borders. Sweden and Finland are, at the most northern part of Europe, I would say. Australia obviously has strategic advantages to pose a risk to China. According to the White House, the first initiative under AUKUS is to commit to a shared ambition to support Australia in acquiring nuclear-powered submarines for the Royal Australian Navy. So that marked a trilateral effort of 18 months to, quote, seek an optimal pathway to deliver this capability. In addition to this commitment, the White House committed to enhancing the joint capabilities of interoperability of Australia into the NATO arena, primarily focusing on cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and additional underseas capabilities. It's no surprise that Russia and China would oppose this kind of alliance. But let me get back to Russia and China. Scott Kennedy, a China expert at Washington Center for Strategic and International Studies, said that despite the rhetoric, there would be limits on the alliance, stating, quote, China is willing to stand with Russia through thin, but not thick. If a war breaks out over the Ukraine or Taiwan, we could expect this partnership to fracture. So he's the expert. He probably has a lot more study time on the issue than I do. But I wouldn't take this alliance very light because they're both authoritarian governments. And unlike the Cold War, when it was communism kind of battling communism, which one would win out, the Soviet Union's form of communism or the Chinese form of communism, there was that kind of clash over the leaders who thought their form of communism was the more superior type. Now that we have more of a distinction between Russia's form of government and then the Chinese communism, I feel like the mutual understanding that the West is more of an adversary, that they will be willing to work together through thick and thin. So it'll be interesting to see if actually China and Russia do support each other militarily. I mean, there's a pretty far trek between Taiwan and the Ukraine, and there's a lot more capability for the West to move people, resources, equipment to the areas of support, as opposed to China sending equipment all the way across Mongolia, all through Siberia, all the way down to Russia's border with Ukraine. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. This is the second part of our Russia and China entanglement today. On February 4th, 2022, Putin unveiled a new Russian oil and gas deal with China worth an estimated $117.5 billion. So this new contract for the Russian giant Gazprom is to supply 10 billion cubic meters per year to China from Russia. So a spokesman from Russia said that this deal was good for 25 years, whereas the Chinese spokesperson said that it was good for 30 years. So in a second deal on the same day, oil giant Rosneft signed a deal with China's National Petroleum Corporation to supply 100 million tons of oil through Kazakhstan over the course of 10 years, essentially extending an already existing deal. So this deal is worth roughly $80 billion, according to Rosneft. So the first gas is set to flow through the new pipeline in the coming 2 or 3 years. Russia is currently Beijing's third largest gas supplier, and as it stands in 2022, China is the world's biggest energy consumer. No surprise there. Since Putin came to power in 1999, it's been a point of emphasis for his presidency to move or mitigate his reliance on traditional European customers to fuel his economy. Pun intended. I'm no energy expert, so for people who are in the industry, the energy industry, go ahead and leave in the comment section how much of a significance this new deal is with Russia and China. So what does this mean for the West? For one, it means that our sanctions on Russia's economy will be dampened because now they're just exporting gas and everything to China. And actually, to this day, Russia is still Europe's main provider of natural gas. 35% of Europe's gas comes from Russia alone. So in these sanctions, not only do we hurt Russia's economy, but we also hurt our allies because now they have to pay a higher price for gas. Now they have to scramble around trying to trade gas amongst European Union countries, and it's just a big old pain in the ass for everybody involved. But now that Russia has this deal with China, Russia's economy will probably be able to handle a little bit more of Western-induced sanctions. Now there's multiple levels of cooperation between Beijing and Moscow. And in my opinion, that's significant because if you have an economic deal, like I said, and you have agreement on the military side, well, that cooperation will go on for decades. Hence, look at NATO, right? So now that we see the cooperation between China and Russia as a new economic deal was just signed this week, what do I think of China and Russia getting cozy economically? I still feel like the bigger competition is China. They are our larger competitor. Our economies are pretty intertwined at this point. We are competing with our navies. We're competing over contested land. We are disputing against Taiwan independence or not Taiwan independence and rejoining China. While Russia may seem like a larger threat, overall, China has the bigger sphere of influence. But Russia doesn't have the economy to sustain a drawn-out war. I think we should still focus largely on China. I think we should try to figure out ways to encourage bringing back American manufacturing. I think we should limit our imports from China. And likewise, I say that without having seen the spreadsheets of our imports and exports to the countries. But if we could cut reliance on China tremendously, I think that would be a great thing, because before Trump was elected, China was supposed to overtake the U.S. economy and become the largest economy on the planet. I don't know how much Trump was able to offset that or delay the time frame from that happening, but I think that's important. I know India and China have had their squabbles as well. I think the United States should reach out to India, try to strengthen our ties there. Sort of how Saudi Arabia is hedged against the Middle East and Iran in a similar circumstance, even though that situation is a lot more complex. I'm not surprised by the alliance. I mean, that was what was expected to happen. And, you can't blame these two countries for doing what's in the best interest for them. From their perspective, I would imagine that they are probably thrilled that they have an opportunity to work together to combat the West, because they're simply doing what we've been doing since the end of World War II. And how does that influence what's going to happen in the Ukraine now that they have the support of China? Well, that is yet to play out. The first U.S. troops reinforcing NATO allies in Eastern Europe arrived in Germany on February 4th. Now, according to U.S. military European Command, they will set up headquarters in Germany to support 1,700 paratroopers meant to deploy to Poland. Soldiers from the 18th Airborne Corps are the first of 2,000 soldiers to arrive in Europe following the Pentagon's announcements of additional forces from the United States moving to Europe in support of our NATO allies. Now, on February 2nd, President Joe Biden ordered nearly 3,000 extra troops to Poland and Romania to shield Eastern Europe from a potential spillover from the Ukraine crisis. Now, a spillover is just, if there's any conflict that kind of jumps borders, well, then technically it's a violation of sovereignty, and the host country where it spills over will be pulled into an armed conflict. Now, that's not good for anybody because it just heightens tensions, and nobody wants war in their country. So there will probably be some hefty pushback from that country. So as a preventative measure, Joe Biden is positioning troops around the Ukraine in strategic areas so that doesn't happen. I think it's a good move. It keeps us from stacking troops at the border where all of the mess can happen, and it kind of forms a little buffer zone, which is important. So a striker squadron with 1,000 service members are already based in Germany, and that will be the group sent to Romania, while 1,700 service members from the 82nd Airborne will deploy from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Poland. So once again, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said these forces are not going to go fight in the Ukraine. We are making it clear that we are going to be prepared to defend our NATO allies if it comes to that point. Now, I applaud this move tremendously, because too often the United States has led the coalition against our adversaries, right? And now this position of providing a buffer zone with our troops and supporting our NATO allies, it's showing them that we are there to help them strategically, but that it's not directly our war. We just ended a 20-year war, and now we don't really want to jump into another armed conflict. Now, if we can provide support, weapons, and all that stuff to our NATO allies, be there and match the numbers of their troops, now that's a huge advantage for us, because it shows the world that this isn't our conflict. We don't live at Russia's borders. We're not in Eastern Europe. It's more of their issue, and we are the support. But as it is now, obviously, the United States being the biggest world power there is, it looks like it's our conflict. I think I think it's important to differentiate that that's not the case. And I think this policy does well. So the units ordered to leave this week were not a part of the 8,500 soldiers originally put on standby by the Pentagon, which signals that more troop movement may be coming in the following weeks. Congressional members on the Republican side have had mixed reactions to Biden's plan to send troops to Eastern Europe. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, considered a defense hawk, said that sending more troops is the right signal and predicted that more troops may be warranted in the near future. He wrote on Twitter saying, quote, "It is imperative that NATO meet the moment and that we stand firmly against Putin's efforts to divide the alliance." Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell also backed the move, but he wanted to see Biden move troops sooner, saying, quote, "Yesterday, I was glad to hear that the U.S. forces are finally moving to reinforce our eastern flank allies. I urged the president to take this step nearly 2 months ago. I hope this belated action will lead to other NATO allies to follow suit." So like I said before, sending troops sends the message to our NATO allies that we're in it, we will support them, and that they should follow suit. Indiana Senator Mike Bronoff was not in support of sending troops and blamed the administration for helping kill legislation in the Senate that would sanction Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline to Germany, reasoning it would have deterred Putin. So like I just said, I don't think a sanction on Russia's gas supply is all that beneficial to all parties. Sanctions that we talked about would be less effective. So Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri had the most interesting perspective, in my opinion. He is pushing the administration to reverse course on the U.S. support for Ukraine's prospective membership in NATO. He argued that it's not clear that Kiev's membership in the alliance would be in the U.S. interest. He does believe the U.S. should provide military assistance, but argued that a binding military commitment to the Ukraine would distract from competition with China. So, that's interesting. He sees it as a distraction from the bigger threat, which would be China, the bigger competition. He was quoted saying, "This means the United States can no longer carry the heavy burden it once did in the regions of the world, including Europe. To the contrary, we must do less in these secondary theaters in order to prioritize denying China's hegemonic ambitions in the Indo-Pacific Ocean." So now I agree with his position on the Ukraine. Is it in the best interest of the United States to include the Ukraine into NATO? The military alliance is a tremendous pull on resources, especially if Russia were to continually just amass troops on the border at all times. I mean, what would the United States' response be? Do we keep extra troops in Poland and all those areas at a time where we are downsizing? I don't know. Do we pull out our troops completely out of the area? I'm not sure. Is it in the best interest of the United States? It's hard to tell. But I do 100% agree that this is a distraction from the larger looming threat of long-term, the competition with China, right? As we learned in history in World War II, fighting a war on two different fronts did not work out well for Germany. And thankfully, Hitler gambled and lost on that because he probably would have conquered the world. Fighting a war on two different fronts strains military resources, and it's not sustainable. Now, if something happens in the Ukraine and we go to war with Russia and NATO goes to war with Russia, well, that would be a perfect opportunity for China to try to do something to Taiwan. And if we're all committed to that theater, we kind of leave Taiwan hanging quite a bit. Now, I don't know the capacity of the U.S. military to fight two wars on two different fronts, but I imagine that obviously it wouldn't be as good as fighting one war where we could focus all of our resources and assets to accomplish one goal in one area. Now, the fact that all this is going on, troops are moving to Poland, to Romania, to Germany, and that we also had the efficiency to go in to Syria and take out ISIS's leader really gives me hope in the U.S. military's ability to balance various competing interests. Now, granted, the Special Forces just, was an elite group that went in there and took them out. It's a great sign. That brings us to the end of this episode of Newscap. Stay tuned until next week. We'll have some more stuff, probably about Russia and China. Obviously, you guys can see my interests lie within China and Russia and other global powers. And so what they're doing will decide what the rest of the world is doing. What they do, the world will react to. And likewise, what we do, the world will react to. So it's very important. You can't look at politics, geopolitics, international relations without analyzing the superpowers. They're making big moves right now, and we'll see how that ripples down. Stay safe, accomplish big things this week. I'll catch you next episode.